Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. As you're joining, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Thank you. Yes, welcome, everybody. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. We'll get started in about 30 seconds because we do have a pretty busy agenda for today.
I think we could probably just get started, Jack. It's
All right,
that
sounds
busy.
good.
It is that busy of an agenda. It's very
Yep, sounds good. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I just wanted to give a few Food Council updates before I pass it over to Michelle to get us started. First off, just a heads up that crossover date for bills in the Maryland General Assembly was this past Monday at midnight, or I guess Monday night, Tuesday morning at midnight. So our policy trackers had a lot of updates this week. The date pretty much signifies bills have to be crossed over to the opposite chamber by that time if they want to go through the kind of normal process of passing the bill. There are some other processes if they don't cross over in that time, but the goal is to cross over any bills before that date, and the deadline was this Monday. So our notes afterwards will have updates, including all of our testimony and what happened with those bills, and our tracker has all of the other bills as well. Another heads up, the Food Council, we recently released our 2022 annual report. There will be a link in the chat if people would like to read that. And then my last update before we get started is that on April 11th and April 13th, both at 1:30 and 7 p.m., there will be county budget advocacy opportunities at County Council. There will also be a link in the chat. There will be more information as well in our follow-up notes about how to sign up for and things like that. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Michelle to get started.
Thanks, Jack. Hi, everyone. Michelle Caruso on staff here at the Food Council. We're really excited about our agenda today. I'd just like to highlight, if this is your first time joining us on our food system advocacy community calls, one of the goals of these calls is to introduce food system advocates to our elected officials and provide opportunities for our community to ask questions and learn about food system priorities from the folks that are the decision makers in our county. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce Councilmember Marilyn Balcombe, who is joining us today as our featured speaker. Councilmember Balcombe has been working to improve Montgomery County for nearly 30 years. Prior to joining County Council, she was the president and CEO of the Gaithersburg Germantown Chamber of Commerce. She has also served as the executive director for the Black Rock Center for the Arts in Germantown. She was a key part of the completion of the Germantown Library and the Germantown Town Center Park, and as a longtime resident of Germantown, she represents Montgomery County District 2. So without any further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Councilmember Balcombe. Thank you again for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And I think this is more of me learning from you than you learning from me. You are the experts. So just a little bit about me in this new role. So I'm in District 2. I'm the District 2 rep, which is in Montgomery County, Germantown, Clarksburg, Poolesville, Darnestown, and North Potomac. And it is the largest district, largest geography of all of our 7 districts. We went from 5 districts to 7 in this election. And so I'm District 2. And not only is it the largest geographic area, but it certainly has the largest majority of the ag reserve in my district, which I'm so happy and pleased to represent. My background, I'm an accountant and organizational psychologist, so it's an interesting mix to be here on the council. So I always go to the numbers first. and they have to make sense. And then, as Michelle mentioned, I was with the Gaithersburg Germantown Chamber of Commerce for a very long time. And so buying local, supporting local is just in my DNA. It's part of who I am and what I firmly believe. And I think that that's so important for a group like this in terms of promoting local food source. So I'm very happy to do that. It's part of who I am. And I also feel strongly that, farming is a business, and we need to make sure that our farms are viable, economically viable, and the intersection between locally sourced food and meeting the needs of our local community is really so important. And thank you all for how you fit into that. Just this Tuesday, we had the great honor to mark the 50th anniversary of National Agricultural Day. That really was created in 1973 to look at the vital role that agricultural stewards play in nurturing and protecting our natural resources. And so Jenny Freeman was there. I don't know if anybody else on the call was there, but it really was a great way to highlight people who grow food. That was, it was an honor to do that, a very nice way to do that. My committees, I'll just briefly touch on that to see where the intersections are. As you all know, the work of the council is done through committee. So my committees are economic development. It's a brand new committee. So as we go through the budget, it will be an interesting process because it's a new process for the Economic Development Committee. But I'm also on transportation and environment. So both of those committees really do intersect with a lot of what this group does. So for economic development, we cover the Conference and Visitors Bureau, alcohol beverage services, the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, permitting, which is such a key issue, the Revenue Authority. We have the new grape crush facility in Poolsville that's under the Revenue Authority, which will be in my committee, and various incubators. There's been a lot of talk about how to create new incubators for new industries, and so that would come from my committee. And then the other workforce development is another issue. I'm the lead on workforce development for the council. And that's a critical issue about how we get pipeline workers for all industries, but certainly your industry. And then we also cover the county's small business advancement team. It's just been rebranded as the business centers, business center. And so that rebranding is going to come out, and pay close attention to that. For those of you who either run a business or run a nonprofit, my feeling from the chamber world is nonprofit is a tax status. You're still businesses, and you still hire employees, and you still buy goods and services and contribute greatly to the economy. So this new business center is a resource for all businesses. And then T&E transportation. We cover the rustic roads. There's a new study on the rustic roads that's coming out soon, you might want to be aware of. And then from the environmental perspective, there's significant overlap in what you do and what my committee does. So that just covers a little bit about my committees. From the Food Council, perspective, from a food distribution, food scarcity issue. Some of the things that are on my radar, the biggest thing, of course, is the Office of Food System Resilience. I mean, that has been a big advancement, and I think that's that's great, and we'll see that grow and see what that's going to do. But then also the strategic plan to end childhood hunger. That we just had a briefing on that from Health and Human Services had a briefing on that. And I want to highlight a couple things that just resonated with me. Not that I'm going to take the lead on these, but there are things that just resonate. And free school meals, that's something that I feel strongly about. I would love to make sure that I would love for that to happen. Huge budgetary impact, but I grew up on free meals in my entire education with me and my siblings. It's so important, and I think that that's something that I would like to support. Of course, summer meals, weekend backpack meals is important. SNAP enrollment, I know that that's something that should be an easy thing to fix, but we're reaching populations that it's more difficult. You're the experts on that, but that's something that I would like to see move forward. Food is medicine. I've had briefings on that. Thank you so much. And I think that's really something that the world is ready for. And I hope that the county supports that. The community schools, the pantries for the community schools, these are the community schools designated by the blueprint. And we have been visiting schools in my district. And so the very first school I visited is a community school. And I am just blown away by how important they are and what a great job the schools are doing. And it's really seamless. And the schools that I've been to, I'm not sure if all the schools are as if the rollout is as effective, but it's so important. And I feel I'm not an educator, and but I've always felt that we're asking the school system to do so much other than teaching our children. And so the wraparound services that just continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the community school concept of providing pantries, providing diapers, providing education classes, parenting classes. The one, I'm trying to remember which one it was, has mindfulness meditation. They converted one of the portables into a mindfulness center, and it's so lovely to walk in there. And it's so I fully support the concept. It's great. And then financial literacy for families, I think, is another area that resonates with me. So those are just a few of the things that kind of I pulled out of the strategic plan that I think is important. Just a couple other things, and I'd love to have questions. So we just had a briefing yesterday on FEMA and ARPA funds. And there are some funds that were allocated to food security that have not been used yet. And so the council will be looking at how to use those funds. And I'm assuming that the Office of Food Systems Resilience will have a lot to say about that. But stay tuned on that. It's about $6.5 million. That's an M. It sounded like a B, but it was an M. That would be great. The other thing that we're really that impacts just about everything we do is the change in SNAP benefits. So we're fully aware of the impact that that's having on all of our food distribution entities, and not only the food distribution, but of course, as you all know, food insecurity can enter in so many different doors. So that's been recognizing that. The other thing that I when I was looking, the Made in MoCo food and beverage guides, that just really, resonates so much from my chamber background. I'm all for really looking at Montgomery County businesses and how everyone can support them. And anytime I can, whatever programs you have, anytime I can add my voice, very happy to put it out in our newsletter, very happy to put it out on my social media. Consider me a fan of that concept. So when we were talking about the ARPA funds, one of the things that came up was the Food Aggregation Center and the possibility of that. I think that that's a really important program, long-term project. And it would be interesting to see what we could do short-term, kind of interim. I see it as I would like to see it as a long-term sustainable project but that's going to cost a lot of money. However, the concept I think is really important for a number of reasons. And I mentioned this yesterday during our hearing, our briefing. It's a great intersection between helping small food producing farmers, table food farmers, but also looking at that self-sustainable resiliency issue of shopping local and providing our own food source in Montgomery County. So I really, that concept resonates with me from an economic development perspective and from a self-sustaining concept. We learned a lot of lessons in COVID. And one of those lessons is, we need to be more self-sufficient and particularly in the food area. So those are some of the things that that have come to me. Budget, I know that you're going to have a briefing on the budget right after me, so I'm not going to go into much detail. There is a proposed 10% tax increase proposed, property tax increase, and there's also a recordation tax increase for the capital budget. They will be very difficult conversations over the next, we are required to present a budget, approve a budget by June 1st. We're targeted to make a final budget on May 25th. So between now and then, we've got a lot of work to do. That's that. They also, just one more thing, the Office of Grants Management. So for grants, the grant process within Montgomery County has changed a couple of years ago, but that was right actually during COVID. So there's a new system. So depending on where you interface with the grant management system, you may want, if you haven't, may get a briefing on how the new grants management system works. And it's actually I think it's the Office of Grants Management, which is a new office. So I said a lot. Don't know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Balcombe, and I appreciate you mentioning our MoCo Made program, as well as the strategic plan to end childhood hunger that the Food Council helped to develop. I think you also touched on each of our 4 policy priorities, so I'm not sure if you intended to do that, but they must have sunk in, or we know that those are, you know, really important things to target, especially SNAP. So I really appreciate that. There is about 10 minutes for questions that we have available, so I welcome advocates and community members on the call to either raise your hand or put your questions in the chat. I'm happy to read them. I'm sure there's a lot folks want to know. I'm seeing a lot of appreciation in the chat for Councilmember Balcombe's work, so I want to call that out. But does anyone have any questions? This happened last time, and then we ran out of time for questions because people didn't speak up early enough. So I'll go ahead and start. Councilmember Balcombe, based on your small business experience and your Chamber of Commerce experience, what opportunities post-COVID do you see for our small food businesses? You know, restaurants were hit really hard. You know, what are ways that food system advocates can support these small food businesses?
Yeah, I think that we need to get back to, we did some of this during COVID. We did a, you know, I think it was Takeout Tuesdays, and we tried to put out a lot of guides. I think that looking at, you know, pushing the shop local, it resonates with people. I think people just need a reminder. I know that even though we're assuming COVID is over, it's in various stages of being over. I think that what people don't recognize is that small businesses are really hanging on by a thread. If they had reserves, they've used those reserves long ago. And so small businesses really need that help. Our restaurants need the help. And so anytime you can lend your voice to the shopping local and getting that word out of please visit our small local restaurants. You know, for food producers, same thing, just pushing that out. We did talk yesterday about potential funding sources. You know, they've pretty much dried up, but the county needs to look at ways to look at future grants to keep our small businesses open. There is a new website with the business centers, Montgomery County Business Center. I don't have the URL with me right now, but the whole purpose of that is to if you have a small business that needs support, there are counselors, business counselors, you know, that I don't know what they're calling themselves. They're probably not calling themselves counselors, but that can sit down with you and walk through it. One of the things that we discovered is that some of our small businesses just need some hand-holding and just need somebody to talk it through. And so there are resources available. Contact me. I'll get you in touch with them. They were called the Business Advancement Team in the past. I don't know what they're calling themselves now. Business Navigators. But there is help available. And so please contact my office and we'll get you in touch with them.
Thank you. I see Thomas put the link in the chat for everyone. So thank you, Thomas, one of our next speakers. Mike Houston also put in the chat that there's a cold storage grant that's due at the end of the month. Montgomery County small businesses and nonprofits are eligible. And I know that the Food Council has shared out that opportunity in our newsletters. I did get a question directed to me from Chris Farrell, who wanted to know which other districts and county council cover the ag reserve besides District 2.
Sure. So District 7, which is Don Lutke's district. So the dividing line, so if you picture the county, and the ag reserve is kind of like a halo around the, it came from the wedges and corridors concept, right? So we have these wedges of green space and the corridors of development. And so if you just picture the halo around the top of the county, the dividing line is roughly Clarksburg, Damascus. So the Damascus portion on down Laytonsville, down to Olney area is District 7, and that's Dawn Ludke's. And so she and I are partnering in this endeavor. But you will always have Andrew Friedson in your back pocket. He was the council rep for the western part of the county for the past 4 years, and he remains as the chair of the Planning and Housing Commission. And the Office of Agriculture is in Planning and Housing. I made a big play for it to come to us in economic development, but Andrew won out, which makes sense. The Ag Reserve was created through zoning, and it really is a planning and zoning creation, and it's a model nationwide. So between me, Dawn, and Andrew, you've got a good team.
Thanks, Councilmember Balcombe. I have an additional question about constituent engagement, but I want to pause and make sure that no one else wants to raise their hand. Okay, great. So we know that the county budget period is a really, it's a hot topic. It's an opportunity for a lot of engagement with constituents from a variety of perspectives. So what is the best way for food system advocates to engage with your office about the issues that you mentioned, or about the county budget?
Yeah, so the most important thing for everyone to know is where their money sits, right? And so is it which department it is, and whether it's a line item, a grant, that's assuming you're getting money from the county. I know that many people aren't, right? But whether your money's coming from the state or the county or federal government, just knowing where it sits, and then knowing which committee it goes to. So, the county executive has control over from the departmental perspective. Then it comes over to us and it comes through committee. So I would assume that most of your budget comes through HHS. However, there may be some that comes through Planning and Housing, through Office of Ag. And I'm trying to think of other areas that it, and so I think that's what's important. And when I work with people and they talk to me about their budget, that's the first question I ask is, where does your money sit in the budget? And if you don't know, we can help you figure that out. I'm trying to learn it all myself. And then first, so the first thing is the county executive has proposed a budget. We have that's online. Depending on how savvy you are, you can kind of figure it out. I have staff that helps me do that. So, and then we'll start looking at those budgets on April 11th is when we start looking at them. So there's public hearings. You can advocate for during your public hearing. During the public hearing, we're not going to be able to hear from everyone, so very likely there will be waiting lists, and but still submit testimony. And so you can notify us any number of ways. The most effective way to do it is to submit testimony during the public hearing time window, and to submit your testimony through the formal submitting testimony. That's one way to do it. That gets to all of us. It goes in the packet, which is important, right? Then you can always send emails to us, and we read them. With staff, read the emails first, and then they're assigned to different people. And then if you have a specific constituent issue in your district, it's always best to go to your district rep, because we get hundreds of emails a day, hundreds. Sometimes we'll get 50 with the same subject line. And so when we get an email, we look to see, okay, what district is this in? And we do a warm handoff if we can. But if you're in District 2, regardless of what your issue is, if you're in District 2, please contact me and let me know what the issue is. The same if you're in District 7 or wherever you are. That's one of the issues that that's our job, is to help you navigate. And hopefully we can do that. Hopefully we do it well. That said, you might not like the answer, right? And then we can talk about what work needs to happen to change the answer the next time you ask. So.
Very fair and balanced point. Well, thank you so much. I know your time is incredibly valuable and you're incredibly busy, and we really appreciate you taking the time to introduce yourself to the folks on the call, and explain a little bit about your food system priorities and answer our questions. So I really appreciate you taking the time
Sure.
today.
And please, like I said, just let me know if you need anything.
Thank you.
Except money.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Next, we're going to turn it over to another hot topic in the county. We're thrilled that Thomas Tippet and Grace Pedersen of the Montgomery County Office of Management and Budget were able to join us this afternoon. The county executive released his budget about a week ago, and I'd love to just turn it over to Thomas or Grace now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Thomas Tippet. I'm from the Office of Management and Budget. I'm a alumni of the Food Council and a lifelong friend. Here with Grace. She's the OMB analyst for HHS, where many of the food-related FY24 investments have been made. I'm just going to go over a little bit of context around the budget, how it's prepared, how the decisions are made, how you can get involved, and some of the budget pressures that we've been under, because this was a difficult budget. But for those of you that don't know, the county's fiscal year starts on July 1 and ends on June 30th. Departments and agencies begin to submit their budget proposals in fall, so fall of last year for this budget cycle. And then at that same time, the county executive has budget forums, which is a great place for either residents or organizations like yours to come and publicly communicate your priorities to the executive. He's a very busy person, and there isn't a lot of time. There are no public hearings for the county executive. So these are the only opportunities where you can publicly advocate for your organization and your priorities. So then in winter, the executive, the Office of Management and Budget, and department and agency leadership get together and deliberate on the proposed budgets for organizations. And then in March, just last week, the executive, on March 15th, the executive transmits his budget over to the county council, where they then deliberate, alter, and finally approve the county's operating budget for the next fiscal year, FY24, which starts July 1 of 2023. And I would say this is the first budget in a while that's been normal. And what I mean by that is not that we've had extenuating circumstances where we're providing services to protect our residents during the pandemic, but it's the first time we're creating a budget without a major infusion of federal funding, like Councilmember Balcombe just stated. So that is one of our major budget pressures, is that, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars are not there within our revenue structure to provide those essential services. And the executive has gone to great lengths to continue these services, right? Rental assistance, food distribution, the hubs were funded from the American Rescue Plan funding, the Working Family Income Supplement, which, if you don't know, there's been a match for the earned income tax credit for low-income families, and the executive is going to continue to match that at 70%, utilizing general fund and the normal tax revenues that we receive. Other budget pressures include high inflation. That has just increased the cost of county services and contracts, utilities, fuel, etc. There's been increased demand on county services, a highly competitive labor market. So that's had pressure on wages and compensation for county workers and emergency responders, and a projected mild recession. And this is the last budget pressure, but it's the most significant, right? So we've lost this federal funding, but we're also having major write-downs in tax revenue, property, recordation taxes due to mortgage rates being high. There isn't a lot of selling of houses going on. So we are under major budget pressures, yet the county executive is finding ways to preserve those essential services for human services, feeding, rental assistance, and the essential hubs that we've created in the FY23 budget. I just want to go into some of the key highlight investments, and then I'm going to let Grace touch on some of the food related items. But again, the executive has been able to preserve those essential services. He's provided record funding for the Montgomery County public school system. He's providing programmatic enhancements within childcare. He's fully funding the Montgomery College budget. He's providing additional investments in economic development and workforce training. He's reestablishing the Montgomery County Office of the People's Council, which is a mediation group for residents and homeowners. Provides additional support for the county's community partners. So those are the kind of the major overview of the FY24 budget. But I just want to touch on one of the points that Councilmember Balcombe stated, which is the Office of Food Systems Resilience. That was an FY23 creation. The executive saw exactly what the Food Security Task Force did and accomplished in the time, in our time of need, and said, we need to sustain that structure and infrastructure and solidify it within the base of the county's operating budget. So he created that office. It's an office of 3 and maintains ongoing funding for programs like the money market grants, the community gardens grants program, the farm to food bank program, and I'm missing one, and the food council. So, I mean, that the executive sees, food systems resilience as a major priority. He's created a non-principal office for it, which is not something that is done lightly in county government. So it has definitely been a major priority for the county executive. So I'm going to turn it over to Grace to just go over some of the investments that were made in FY24. Again, considering the that federal funding going away, these are investments made in the normal tax revenue structure that the county has.
Right, thank you, Thomas. So the executive was balancing the challenge of so much federal assistance going away while trying to transition the county out of a period where the pandemic was so devastating at first, and now we're getting to a more normalcy, but people really still see a real need for food assistance. So In fiscal 23, there was over 12 million committed to what we call the food staples program. And going forward, that funding was previously supported entirely by federal funds, and now we're evaluating what general fund commitment needs to be made to ensure people don't go hungry. And that program is still available, but still also affordable within the county's budget. So, so far in the executive's fiscal 24 recommended budget, there's 6.1 million devoted to this program. And the plan is that after the first quarter, we'll evaluate what spending has been thus far in the fiscal year and see whether that will be enough resources to continue through the full year or if additional resources may be needed. And at that point, a supplemental appropriation would be processed with council approval. Then going to the community organizations, that what's not listed here, but I'm glad you brought this up, Thomas, is that the community service hubs funding has also been continued in fiscal 24. That's about $3 million in general funds that was previously supported with federal assistance, but the executive has committed to funding the hubs in the upcoming fiscal year. And then I noted a couple of grantees that submitted specific requests. The Charles Quainer Conservancy for Urban Farming receives a $50,000 general fund enhancement. Nourishing Bethesda receives an increase of $24,000 in general funds to expand their service, their operational hours. And then notable, there's a $300,000 decrease to the Manna Food Center from what was made possible in fiscal 23 with the additional federal funding, but the executive has committed an overall increase compared to their resource levels before the pandemic, before that federal infusion of funding. So before the pandemic, they were regularly receiving, I think it was about $270,000. So an additional $275,000 has been committed to the Manna Food Center. So although it's a decrease from fiscal 23, going forward, it is an increase overall to the Manna Food Center. So those are some general highlights to specific organizations and programs, and I'd be happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Thomas or Grace? I'm going to move us to the gallery view so we can all see each other. I know this is a very hot topic. I would just ask Thomas and Grace, I think Councilmember Balcombe explained this a little bit, but so let's say this is the only time that we have folks on to speak about the county budget process. So we know that there's an opportunity to weigh in April as county council is deliberating, but for folks on the call or future folks that are watching the recording, when is the right time to present, opportunities for county funding to the county executive so that, investments like what happened with the Charles Quainer Farm, could be considered for the FY25 budget, for example?
I would say both from a resident organization standpoint, often is the answer, right? So as soon as the budget is completed, the approved budget comes out. I mean, getting things on the leadership's radar is what you have to do, and you guys are obviously already organized. But if I was to tell a resident what to do, it would be get involved in a larger group, whether it's your civic association, your homeowners association, a group like yours. Just you're better off in numbers, right? Because this is a democracy, and like the larger you can show that your group is, the higher priority your request will be going forward. I mentioned the budget forms in the fall. That is a really great place. I mean, the executive's mind is going toward the budget at that point, but I would say earlier in summer is the place to start working toward the FY25 operating budget. because these are, once things start churning, if it's not a high priority or in a list come fall, it's going to get beaten out by, the already hard decisions that are just to keep county government funded at the same services level in most years.
Thank you. Does anyone else have, I have more questions, but I want to pause again. Thomas or Grace, could you tell us a little bit about the recession projections and how that impacts planning for the future and how that might impact? So if we are thinking, or if our community is thinking about making budgetary asks for FY25, how do those projections work? And, just what should advocates be aware of?
Projections are magic, right? They are, but there are multiple indicators that we know what our property tax is going to be, but income taxes make or break our budget. We know what recordation taxes are, which is and transfer taxes of property. So anything that's property based, we know the indicators, and it's almost real time. It's that income tax that is really going to make or break the budget. So there are 3 times in the year that we look at this. We look at it in June. There's a fiscal update in December. So between June and December of this year, we actually wrote down taxes at $100 million from June to December. So we knew coming into the February fiscal update, where we really solidify what we're going to build the budget off of, that it was going to be a really tight budget year. So I would, as someone that's developing request of county government, I would stay tuned, especially to that December update on where the projections are, right? Are they above the June? Are they below the June? If they're below the June, it's likely going to be something of a same services, and decisions are going to be very hard come February and March for the executive.
That's really helpful. Anne Marie, I'm going to call on you for a question that I got directly in the chat. Could you tell the group a little bit more about the hubs in like 30 seconds or a minute?
Marla's watching me. She's going to quiz because she probably knows them better than I do. But we do have 8 hubs in the county that are, set to work with very specific high need zip codes in the county, although they will, they don't turn anyone away, but they do try to connect people to their appropriate hub. Some of them, they all provide food. They all provide other wraparound services. Many of them do have partnerships with either Catholic Charities or Cheer or other community organizations to assist with SNAP enrollment, connecting with benefits. Some of them distribute diapers, which is, a really high need, high cost item in the county for families. So really just trying to kind of connect with all the different services that families might need in that area, and then to work with other local partners to provide additional services. How's that, Marla?
You done good. Way to go, Anne-Marie.
Chris, I hope that helped answer your question. I'm sure someone will find a link for you that we can drop in the chat if you want more.
Oh, I'll put it in the chat for.
Thank you. Thank you. Thomas and Grace, I have one last question, but I do want to pause because I've been asking all the questions. Okay, I'll ask the final question. Can you explain, so the budget process happens, it's a big process, happens once per year, but then there are special appropriations that happen throughout the year. Could you just explain how that process works briefly, and that this isn't quite the only opportunity for things to be added to the budget?
The short answer is they should be. So supplemental appropriations were rare prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. They became a regularity because of the emergency nature of operations to provide emergency protective measures to county residents, businesses, tenants, and also the again, the infusion of federal funds that weren't appropriated to department budgets, right? So both the funding and just the nature of the operation. So there were general fund special appropriations during the pandemic, but many of them were the federal funding being spent via special appropriation. So that is often not a mechanism that we would advocate for, and we are attempting to realign expectations back to the fiscal budget process.
That's really helpful information, especially as, you know, we've seen so many special appropriations over the last few years. It's helpful to know where that process originated and that it's going to kind of become, you know, an emergency times only perhaps process. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know this was really helpful. A lot of people had a lot of questions about the budget, and it's really timely. So we really appreciate both of you joining us and walking us through how it impacts the food system and the opportunities to preserve some of those programs that were originated during the pandemic. So thank you, Thomas and Grace. Thomas, great always to see a Food Council alumni on the call. So we appreciate you.
Thank you all.
I'm going to turn it over to Julia Gross. There she is. Hey, Julia, to provide an update on some food system related bills in Annapolis. It's been a really busy time, as Jack was alluding to earlier, and we're excited to hear what made it through, maybe what didn't. Take it away, Julia.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I can do this really quickly, and I'll put my email in the chat for anyone who has any follow-up questions. But I think it was mentioned earlier that we have passed the crossover deadline in Annapolis, which means that bills that haven't been voted out of committee and crossed over to the other side, you know, Senate bills going to the House or vice versa, the bills are pretty much dead in the water, unfortunately, which is, again, very unfortunately where our school meals for all bill landed this year. I think it suffered, as many really great bills did, suffered from the budget being a little bit tighter than expected, and the fiscal note just being a little bit too large for the state to want to pass it this year. So it's definitely not the end of the conversation. We know this is something that we knew from the beginning it was going to take a little bit longer than some bills might. It was going to be a multi-year campaign, which it's looking like it will be. But it's something that, you know, we are going to continue working on. I know many of you have been supportive of this bill and hope that you will join us in continuing to work on this. We're likely going to, with the support of the coalition, likely going to have some conversations in the interim, you know, after session ends, about kind of the strategy moving forward, recapping what happened this year, and how we want to proceed moving forward. I think there are a lot of different advocacy opportunities that we have. You know, there's definitely next year's session, but there's also a lot of advocacy that can happen on the local levels. We're seeing districts pick up the cost here and there. I know Montgomery County has expanded the number of schools that are being covered in your school district. Baltimore County is moving to district-wide CEP next year, and so they're covering all of their schools. We're hoping to be able to kind of make some efforts on the local level as well. Good news on the state level, there is another bill that did pass for school meals, which is covering the Maryland Meals for Achievement program. Again, which I know Montgomery County takes very seriously and enrolls many of your schools in. So this program covers breakfast after the bell, either in the classroom or in grab and go styles in schools with 40% farms rate or higher. And then in schools that opt into using Maryland Meals for Achievement, all of those breakfasts are covered for all of the students in the school. So this bill just doesn't change the program at all. It just increases the state funding for it so that all eligible schools across the state have the ability to opt in if they want to, which is great. We're hoping to see a lot more schools opt in next year. So that's what I have for the federal or the state level updates. I did want to, if I have another minute or so, touch on a couple of things we're seeing on the federal level. So hot off the presses, something that just was announced today, USDA is announced a rule change for the community eligibility provision. So this is, they're looking to lower the eligibility threshold from 40% identified student percentage down to 25. So that comment period is opening tomorrow. And I'll put a link in the chat for anyone. It's not open today, but if you go back tomorrow to this website, you can, it looks like you're going to be able to find the comment section and make comments on this. So we're really excited. This is something that we've been wanting for a while and really hoping that that'll open up some opportunities for more schools across the country to opt in and do CEP. And this is coupled with some news from Biden's budget, which is also funding CEP, $15 billion over the next 10 years to hopefully expand the program. We're hearing rumors of like maybe a statewide option, but we'll see what that funding will bring. And then the last piece I wanted to mention was a bill from Representative McGovern, which is looking to increase the reimbursement rates for school systems, which we're also very supportive of and hoping to flag for our Maryland members of Congress so that they can be supportive as well, because we know school systems are struggling, and this is any increase in reimbursement rates would really help lift some of the financial burden for them. So really hopeful about that one as well. And I think that's it for me so far. But yeah, happy to take questions or put my email in the chat for anyone who wants to follow up with me later.
Thank you, Julia. I have questions, but thank goodness I'm not the only one this time. Marla, you go first.
Thanks, Julia, for all the information and for all the hard work you and your team are doing to support nutrition for our families and our children. Quick question about CEP. While lowering the ISP allows more schools to participate, has there been any discussion or legislation to increase the multiplier, increase the 1.6?
Yeah, that's a great flag, because yes, lowering the eligibility threshold is fantastic, but doesn't necessarily make the program more financially viable for schools and school systems. I know increasing the multiplier has been a priority of FRAC, the Food Research and Action Center, and a number of other advocacy organizations. Full disclosure, I don't know what Biden's $15 billion over the next 10 years is going to include. I think that's something that we would be interested in pushing for, because one of the things that we were hoping to see and didn't see in child nutrition reauthorization was moving that multiplier up from 1.6 to 2.5. So I think that's still a priority and something that is an opportunity to advocate for.
Thank you.
I'm so glad Marla went first, because she got the technical terms that I wasn't going to remember in my question. But I did just want to ask if Julia or if Marla could or if I cover it, you can tell me, but if you want to fill in, for those of you who don't know the ins and outs, which are pretty much all of us on this call about CEP, what they're referring to is the fact that just because you do this program does not mean that the school system is getting fully reimbursed for all of those students participating. And what many of you might not know about MCPS is that it is meant to be, a fully, self, what's the word I'm looking for? Like they are not taking county funds to run food and nutrition services, right? They are.
Fund.
Thank you. They are an enterprise fund, so they have to, make their own money and carry that program themselves. So unlike other districts in the county where county funds are going to that, That is not happening in Montgomery County. So I think it's an important distinction that sometimes gets lost in our conversations about things at the overall state level, to keep in mind that that money has to come from somewhere. And in Montgomery County, the school system is set up that DFNS is self-supporting. So just wanted to put that out there.
If there needs to be clarity around what CEP means, it has nothing to do with the eligibility for free and children who are eligible for free and reduced price meals. It is tied to families that are receiving SNAP benefits or other social service benefits. And so when Julia was talking about the ISP, that's the percentage of families, children in a school that are directly certified for those benefits. And Julia, I've got cobwebs in my brain, so feel free to jump in. But if a school is eligible for their ISP, the percentage of families that are eligible for or that are directly certified is 25%, then and 100 meals are served, then 25 times 1.6, which is the current multiplier, which for the sake of ease, let's say is 60%, then 60% of those 100 children are considered free. And the other 40%, the school system has to absorb the cost. So you could in fact have a school, in Montgomery County does have a school where 98% of the kids are eligible for free and reduced price meals. So basically the whole school eats free. But their ISP is only 40%, which would then mean if that school went to CEP, that it's 66, that much I do know, that 66% of those children would be claimed for USDA to USDA as free, but the other 34%, even though if you went by free and reduced, they'd be free, under CEP, the school system would have to pay for them. I know that makes no sense, but that speaks to why increasing the multiplier, if you increase that 1.6 to 2.5, you get closer to 100, which would then mean that everybody would in fact eat for free and there'd be no impact financially on the county. Whew. Julia, jump in.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, basically increasing the multiplier increases the amount of federal reimbursements that schools would get based on their meal service. So increasing the multiplier is a really important component of that.
I know that this conversation could go on longer, but it's a very hot topic. It's sad that it didn't move forward in the state legislature. So thanks for that update, Julia. I think there are some recommendations in the strategic plan to end childhood hunger for how local government could potentially take action. And we'll be sure to inform folks if there are opportunities to provide feedback or advocacy on those recommendations as that plan moves forward. I know we're over time, so I thank everyone for sticking with us to 2:03. We will be sharing out the notes and a recording of the call. And feel free to email myself or Jack directly if there are any community or organizational updates that you feel you'd like us to share out in the notes. Because this agenda was so jam-packed, Jack was actually supposed to provide an update on all the bills that the Food Council weighed in on. I believe we submitted testimony on 16 bills this legislative session. So bravo, Jack and the policy committee and the rest of the Food Council team. So that will become something that gets shared out in the email as well. So keep an eye on that. You can also follow our public policy tracker, which is on our website. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you next month, April 26th. 1 o'clock for another, I'm sure, jam-packed, exciting 1 hour of your day. So thank you again. We'll see you next month. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.